The flowers were perfect that morning. I remember thinking that specifically, not about the event orders stacked on my workbench, not about the Henderson Park wedding that weekend, not about the 3 custom arrangements I still had left to wire before noon, just the flowers. Ranunculus in blush and ivory, garden roses so heavy they drooped on their stems, eucalyptus that smelled like rain. My little shop on Clement Street was the quietest it would be all week, and for exactly 40 minutes, everything felt like mine. Then the bell above the door rang. I didn't look up right away. Morning walk-ins were usually neighbors grabbing a single stem for a kitchen table, or someone who'd forgotten an anniversary. I kept my scissors moving, stripping the lower leaves off a bundle of stock, and said what I always say, "I'll be right with you." Nobody answered. That's when I looked up. My father was standing in the middle of my shop. He had his hands clasped in front of him the way he does when he's trying to look reasonable. My stepmother was a half step behind him, holding her purse with both hands like she was bracing for something. And my half-sister, who had not spoken a single word to me in 3 years, was standing near the door, eyes fixed somewhere above my head, studying the wall like it had done something to her. 3 years. No calls. No texts. Not even a read receipt on the last message I'd sent, which had been a birthday card for my father that I typed and deleted 4 times before finally sending something simple. "Happy birthday. Hope you're well." He never responded. And now here they were, in my shop, on a Tuesday. I set down my scissors. "We need to talk," my father said. "I opened Foliage and Thread 2 years ago after 18 months of saving every dollar I could scrape together while working double shifts at a grocery floral department and taking weekend certification courses. The name came from a notebook I kept in my 20s, pages of ideas for a business that felt impossible back then. It wasn't impossible. It just took longer than I planned, and it cost me more than money. The falling out with my family happened over my stepmother's son, my half-brother, and a situation that started small and got very large very fast. He'd launched a landscaping company 3 years ago and borrowed money from several people to get it started. I was one of them. $22,000, which I lent in good faith, with a signed agreement that he would repay it within 18 months. He didn't. When I brought it up to my father, he told me I was being selfish. That family doesn't charge interest, that I had a steady income and my half-brother was just getting started. I tried to explain that I wasn't charging interest, I just wanted the principal back because I was saving for my own business. My stepmother cried. My half-sister told me I was making everything about money. My father said I needed to think about what kind of person I wanted to be. What kind of person I wanted to be. I stopped calling after that. I stopped showing up to Sunday dinners. I stopped trying. Not out of spite. I want to be clear about that. I stopped because I realized I was the only one in that family who believed I deserved to be treated like a person rather than a resource. I opened Foliage and Thread 14 months after the last time I saw any of them. My father had never once asked how it was going. "We need to talk," he said again, and I walked out from behind the workbench because I wasn't going to have this conversation with a counter between us. I needed to see their faces. "Okay," I said. "Talk." My stepmother jumped in first, which told me this had been rehearsed. She said my half-brother's landscaping company had taken on a large commercial contract last spring and borrowed against it, took an equipment loan, hired a crew, leased 2 trucks. The contract fell through. The company was now underwater. There were creditors. I listened. I kept my face neutral the way I've learned to do when I need to think and don't want to show it. "We're not asking you to bail him out," my father said, carefully. "We understand you're..." He glanced around the shop at the refrigerated cases, the display window, the small brass sign with my logo, "Doing well here." I almost laughed. "We're asking you to co-sign," my stepmother said. "A consolidation loan. To give him time to restructure. The bank will approve it if there's a co-signer with good credit." I looked at my half-sister who was still examining my wall. "How much?" I said. $65,000, my father said. The number landed in the room and stayed there. $65,000. My credit score, which I had spent 5 years rebuilding after a rough patch in my early 20s, which I had guarded like something sacred because I knew I'd need it to lease this space and buy this equipment, and build this thing that was finally mine. They wanted me to attach my name to $65,000 for a business that had already failed once and was currently drowning. "No," I said. My stepmother's expression shifted. "We thought you might say that," she said. in a tone that was not as controlled as she meant it to be, which is why we wanted to bring something to your attention. My father reached into his jacket and placed a single piece of paper on my workbench. I looked at it without picking it up. It was a copy of the loan agreement my half-brother and I had signed 3 years ago, the one for $22,000. But there was something on it I had never seen before. An addendum, initialed at the bottom, that indicated the loan was subordinated to any future business debts incurred by the borrower. My handwriting, except I had never written that. I picked up the paper. I read it twice. Then I set it back down and I looked at my father and I said, "Where did this come from?" "It was part of the original agreement," he said. "It wasn't, sweetheart." "Don't." I held up one hand. "Don't call me that right now. This addendum was not in the agreement I signed. I have the original. I've had it this entire time." My stepmother said very quietly, "You may be misremembering. I have never wanted to throw someone out of a room so badly in my life, but I didn't. Because I have learned, slowly and at great cost, that the moment you lose your composure with people like this, you lose the narrative. You become the hysterical one, the difficult one, the one who overreacted. I was not going to give them that. "I need you to leave the shop," I said. "I have work orders to finish. I'll call you this afternoon." My father straightened. "I know what you're trying to do," I said, "and I'm asking you calmly to please leave my place of business so I can think." There was a long moment. My half-sister finally looked at me, just for a second, and something crossed her face that I couldn't read. Then my father nodded, and they filed out, and the bell above the door rang again, and they were gone. I stood in the middle of my shop, surrounded by ranunculus and garden roses and eucalyptus that smelled like rain, and I put both hands flat on the workbench and I breathed. I called my attorney at 9:47 that morning. Her name is not important, but she is very good, and she has been my attorney since I first leased this space, because someone told me that any small business owner who doesn't have a lawyer they can call is one bad contract away from disaster. I told her everything. I described the addendum. I told her I had the original agreement in a fireproof box in my apartment. "Bring it in," she said, "today if you can." I closed the shop at noon, which I never do, and drove to her office in the Sunset District. She compared both documents side by side. The paper quality was slightly different. The font spacing in the addendum was inconsistent with the rest of the agreement. The initials at the bottom, the ones in my handwriting, were close but not exact. "This was added after the fact," she said. "And that means you're looking at document fraud." She explained my options. I could report it. I could send a cease and desist. I could pursue the original $22,000 as a civil matter. Or I could wait and see if they pushed further, which would give me more documented evidence of their intentions. I asked her what she would do. She looked at me over her reading glasses and said, "I'd let them come back, and I'd be ready." "My father called at 3 p.m., I answered. "He said they'd given me time to think, and he hoped I'd come around to seeing the full picture. He said co-signing wasn't that big a risk if the restructuring plan was solid. He said my half-brother had a contractor lined up who could bring the business back, that it was just a bridge loan, that it would be repaid within 2 years. I asked him if he understood what co-signing meant. He said of course he did. I asked him what happened to the co-signer if the primary borrower defaulted. Silence. "The co-signer is fully liable," I said. "The entire $65,000, on my credit, on my record, which would affect my ability to maintain the lease on my shop and renew my equipment financing and operate my business." He said I was being dramatic. I said, "I want to ask you something and I want you to answer me honestly." He said, "Okay. Have you seen the loan agreement I signed 3 years ago? The original?" Pause. "Of course," he said. "Then you know what's in it." Another pause. Longer this time. "The addendum was something your brother added for protection," he said. "Standard business language. It wasn't in the agreement when I signed it," I said. "You may not have read it carefully." I took a breath. "Dad, I need you to understand something. I have the original document. My attorney has seen both versions. The addendum is not authentic. I let that land. I'm not going to co-sign the loan. And if anyone contacts my bank, my landlord, or any of my business associates with the fraudulent version of that agreement, I will be filing a police report." The silence stretched so long I thought he'd hung up. Then he said, "You would do that to your family." And I said, "I'm doing it for myself." I thought that would be the end of it. It wasn't. 2 days later, on a Thursday afternoon when the shop was full, I had two part-time assistants arranging centerpieces, a bride and her mother sitting at the consultation table near the window, a delivery driver waiting in the back. The bell rang and my half-brother walked in. I had not seen him in 3 years either. He looked older, tired. He was wearing a fleece vest with his company logo on it, which struck me as a strange choice given that the company was currently failing. He stood near the entrance and looked around the shop with an expression I recognized from childhood. It was the expression he used when he wanted something and was calculating the best angle. "Hey," he said. "I'm with clients," I said. I did not move from where I was standing. "I just need 5 minutes." My bride glanced up from the portfolio I'd given her. Her mother was watching my half-brother with interest. "I'll be right back," I said to them, and I walked to the back of the shop and gestured for him to follow me, because I was not going to do this on the floor. In the back room, surrounded by buckets of cut flowers and spools of ribbon, my half-brother told me he was sorry. I waited. He said he knew the loan had put a strain on things. He said he'd always intended to pay it back. He said the business had just hit some hard patches. "The addendum," I said. He looked at the floor. "Did you add it yourself or did someone help you?" He didn't answer. "I'm not asking to catch you," I said, which wasn't entirely true, but I needed him to keep talking. "I'm asking because I want to understand what actually happened." He said it had been his stepmother's idea, that she'd thought if there was documentation showing my loan was subordinated, the creditors couldn't come after assets that were already encumbered, that it was supposed to protect him, not hurt me. "It's fraud," I said. "You forged an addendum to a legal document with my initials on it." "That's forgery. That's fraud. Those are felonies." He looked up then. He looked genuinely scared, which I believe, because I don't think he had fully understood what he was part of. "I'm not going to file a report," I said, and watched relief start to move across his face. "Today. But I need you to hear what I'm telling you. If anyone, your mother, my father, anyone, makes another attempt to leverage that document against me or my business, I will go directly to the police. I will also be pursuing the original $22,000 in small claims court because I have the authentic agreement and I will win." He said he understood. "I need more than that," I said. "I need you to go back to my father and your mother and tell them exactly what I said, word for word." He nodded. "And I need you to leave my shop and not come back unless you're here as a paying customer." That evening, after I'd closed up, after I'd walked my assistants out and locked the gate and sat on the little stool I keep behind the counter for the moments when my feet hurt and the day has been too long, I called my attorney again. I told her about the conversation with my half-brother. She said I'd handled it well. She said the acknowledgement he'd made, that the addendum had been added deliberately, that it had been his stepmother's idea, was significant. She asked if I had recorded the conversation. I had. California is a 2-party consent state for recordings, but my attorney had advised me before my half-brother arrived that if I kept the conversation to my back room, a space I control on my property, I should clearly state that I was recording at the start. I had said quietly before we even began, "I want you to know this conversation is being recorded." He'd nodded. He had not objected. She said I had options. I thought about it for a long time. What I decided was this: I was not going to go to the police. Not because I didn't have grounds. I did. But because I had learned something in the 3 years since my family went quiet on me. Something I'd learned the hard way, in the months after the last Sunday dinner, when I was still raw and angry and wanted badly for someone to acknowledge what had happened to me. No one was going to give me that acknowledgement. Not my father, not my stepmother, not my half-brother, not the version of events they'd built around themselves, which I'm sure made me the villain in some way I'll never fully know. What I had was the shop, my name on the lease, my equipment, my credit, my reputation with florists and event planners, from the Richmond district to No Valley. I had 2 assistants who called me by my first name and thanked me when I gave them early Friday afternoons in summer. I had a bride and her mother who had sat at my consultation table that Thursday afternoon, and, when I came back from the back room, had said nothing at all about what they'd witnessed, just slid the portfolio back across the table and pointed to the page with the garden roses and said, "These ones." I had built something real. I sent my father a letter, not an email, a letter printed and mailed with a return receipt that laid out the situation clearly: the original loan agreement, the forensic discrepancy in the addendum, the recorded conversation with my half-brother, My intention to pursue the $22,000 in small claims court which I filed for the following week, and a final paragraph that said I was not interested in maintaining contact at this time, and that any further attempts to interfere with my business or financial standing would result in a police report being filed immediately. I did not say I forgave them. I did not say I hated them. I said what was true, and then I stopped. The small claims hearing was 8 weeks later. My half-brother didn't show up. When a defendant fails to appear in small claims court in California, the judge typically issues a default judgment in favor of the plaintiff. Mine was issued in 11 minutes. $22,000 plus filing fees plus statutory interest from the original due date. My father called that evening. I didn't answer. He left a voicemail that said I had gone too far, that I had humiliated the family, that he had given me everything growing up, and this was how I repaid him. I listened to it once. Then I saved it, and because my attorney told me to save everything, then I went back to the workbench and finished the Henderson Park wedding flowers, which were due for setup the next morning, and were, I had decided weeks ago, going to be the most beautiful arrangements I had ever made. The judgment didn't fix everything. It didn't make my father call to apologize. It didn't make my half-sister text me. It didn't give me back the 3 years I spent building something in the silence where my family used to be. But here's what it did. It confirmed, in writing, with a judge's signature on it, that I had been right. That the money was real, that the agreement was real, that what happened to me had actually happened and was not, as I had been told, a matter of me misremembering or being dramatic or failing to think about what kind of person I wanted to be. I know what kind of person I am. I am someone who lends money in good faith and asks for it back. I am someone who builds things slowly, because slow things last. I am someone who pressed her hands flat on a workbench one Tuesday morning and breathed through the worst 10 seconds of her year, and then called her attorney. I am someone who does not need her family to believe her, because she kept the original document. The bell above my door rings at least 100 times a week now. New clients, regulars, the occasional stranger who walks past the window and stops because something catches their eye, the ranunculus, usually, or the garden roses. I step out from behind the counter and I ask them what they're looking for, and most of the time they can't quite say, they just point at something and say those ones, and I wrap them in craft paper and tie them with twine and send them out into the city with something living. That's the whole job, and it's mine.